See, I remembered this time. Hello everyone. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space. And yes, another video for my 2024 Halloween card series. At the end of this video, in the end screen, I'll link to my playlist with all the videos I've done so far. Today's video uses this pumpkin to talk about set that Simon Says Stamp released at the beginning of September. It has been super popular. As of this moment, it's on pre-order, but I think they're gonna get it in stock and be shipping it soon. I have had the idea for this card for a while, and this week's Color Throwdown Challenge was the time for it. And if you're not aware, the Color Throwdown Challenge, it's just a weekly challenge. It's just for fun. I'll have a link to it in my blog post, which is always linked directly below because anyone can play along. And yeah, I did some very simple watercolor, whole bunch of splatter. Had fun. I really had fun working with this one. And yeah, I will have links to everything I used as well in the description box below the video. My links are affiliate links. That just means that if you click on one of my links, end up placing an order, I get a little kickback from that at no extra cost to you. It is what helps pay the bills and keeps the channel going. And let's get into making this card. So I started with some Canson XL watercolor paper, one of my go-tos. And I'm going to put that into my MISTI. And then I'm going to put this big background stamp. And this is like your kind of standard size stamp, like a 6x6 background. And then with this set, because it's a clear set, it's got several sentiments, which I just love. I don't know, the font choices are perfection. Anyway, lined up the stamp. And I'm going to use my anti-static powder tool on the watercolor paper. And I have the watercolor paper, like the smoother side face up. Although with specifically the Canson XL watercolor paper, it's not very textured, but it's going to depend on like the brand you use. But most cold press watercolor papers have a textured side and a smoother side. And more often than not, I use the smoother side because it's just easier to stamp on. That said, a lot of people ask me about hot press watercolor paper. I rarely ever use hot press. It's just a whole different beast, and the way it takes water and color, and honestly, I get annoyed with hot press watercolor paper, so I don't use it. I have it, but I almost never reach for it. This Canson XL does almost anything I want it to do for, card making. It's only when I want to get fancy and do like the no line and that sort of stuff that I'll use like the good watercolor paper. Anyway, I stamped the image a couple times with clear embossing ink to make sure that I got everything stamped. And then I am coating everything with Simon Says Stamp's gold embossing powder. So pouring that over, tapping off the excess. Once I've got everything covered with the embossing powder, I'm going to use my heat tool to melt this. And because it is watercolor paper, I've sped this up in editing, but it does take a bit longer. The thing to always remember with heat embossing though, the minute a section is melted, move on to the next spot. Like, do not keep your heat tool over it. If you start noticing that your embossing powder is starting to bubble, you're overheating it. And if you keep overheating it, not only will it bubble, but it will start to liquefy and sink into the paper. And that's where you get the dull spots or green, like missing areas and that sort of a thing. So you just heat it, move on to the next spot. And as soon as it's smooth and shiny, you're good. So got it all melted. And then I'm taping this down to a hardboard. I don't have a link for this. This is Altenew satin tape. I can't find this anywhere. I'm not sure what's going on with the Altenew satin tape right now. But hopefully it's just a stock issue and they'll get it back because I really like this stuff. Painter's tape works great too. I've used that for many years. And same with the frog tape, basically same stuff. Just a lower tack tape is nice. And I tape it to a hardboard just to hold everything down. It keeps everything a little flatter when I'm doing entire backgrounds. And then I've done it in a ton of videos where I just don't tape anything because I just don't care. It just depends on my mood. But for this one, I taped it down. And then I'm using Distress Oxide inks. And I'm only using 4 colors. Ignore that what one was that? Moss. Whatever it was. My brain literally stopped and I can't remember the name of it. I'm not even kidding, but I'm not going to stop this voiceover because it doesn't matter. I didn't use it. I used bundled sage, crackling campfire, black soot, and then a little bit of walnut stain for the stems. And that's it. Forest moss, forest moss. Wow. Anyway, those are the colors because that's the colors for the challenge is black, orange, and like a sage green, which was another reason why, like, and if you check out the actual challenge, like the graphics there, people have asked me why I don't share the graphics or anything on my videos. I don't own those images, so I ain't risking nothing. So I post a link and we do, that's just how I do it. Anyway, I'm keeping the colors and the coloring pretty simple. And I've talked about this before when it comes to if you are intimidated by watercolor, which I very much understand because I was too back in the day. It is now one of my favorite coloring mediums. But if you've got some Oxide inks, I highly recommend playing with them and watercoloring with them. They're very forgiving, as are Distress inks, but I find that Oxide inks are even more forgiving. I think it's just because of, as Tim Holt says, the creamy dreaminess of them. I love it. And I lost track of how, like, who knows how many videos I even have up. There's well over a couple thousand at this point. But I have many, and many of them are watercoloring and specifically watercoloring with Distress Oxides because I love them. The other thing to take note of is black soot. Just like any, like black soot distress paint, black soot anything with the distress line, it is a very pigmented ink. So you just got to pay attention to it. You know, don't get too comfortable because it doesn't take much. I barely needed any ink to paint these because again, black soot is such a good ink, and the black soot oxide is one of my favorites. So I just went around and painted. I'm using a Altenew watercolor brush. I've been using these for a few months now. When I forget, and I say this every time I mention these, I use them, like I purchased them a few months ago and I've used them quite a bit since and I'm really liking them. So using that, you can't see it, but I have my big jar of watercolor water off to the side. So I was just swirling my brush in water, applying water to each pumpkin area, and then swirling in the ink and painting with it. Simple. And because everything has been heat embossed, all those lines are raised. That's another reason why I love doing this. So they're like little bumper pads. So I don't have to worry about like one area running into another, you know, bleeding into each other, etc. So once I was done painting everything, let it dry. And then I took my distress sprayer and I held it up quite high above this. And I only pressed the nozzle halfway. So that's how you get the big splotchy, drippy bits. And did all of that. And because these are distress, they are reactive with water. The longer you let the water sit, the more like of a reaction you're going to get. It's not as reactive because I've already used water with it, you know, because I've watercolored with it, but you still get a reaction. So I did that a couple times and just picked up the water droplets with some paper towel. Let that dry as well. So I've got that bit of texture. And then of course I'm going to add splatter because that's just what I do. So I let everything dry. I remove the tape. Depending on the type of tape you're using and what you're wanting to do, always be careful removing the tape. One, make sure whatever it is you painted is fully dry. You do not want to try and remove the tape when it's wet. You can tear it quite badly. And yeah, so let it dry, remove the tape, stuck this into my splat box, and then I just used my Altenew black gouache. Black soot distress paint works very well. They are very similar in the intensity. Like this black gouache is just like stupid pigmented. It is, and it stains just as bad as black soot distress paint stains, and I love them. Love it. Perfect black splatter. So I'd watered down the gouache, used my fan brush, splattered it. Again, let that splatter dry. And then I'm using my Gonzai Tombi Starry Colors. And I'm using the blue gold this time. I usually use the yellow gold because it's more like kind of like punchy in the face, bright gold. But this blue gold is closer to like Simon's gold embossing powder. A little more subtle, a little more demure, you know, and it just works. So I splattered that all over the background as well, set it aside. And then I grabbed one of the sentiments from the set and some black cardstock. And I'm going to heat emboss this sentiment with the clear embossing ink and that gold embossing powder. And like I said, I like the font combination. And there is a coordinating die set for this set as well that cuts out the sentiments. And I didn't use the coordinating dies. Like there's coordinating dies that die cut just the sentiments, like, you know, right around them. And I love how like there's a nice like close crop with all of the sentiments. But there's also some rectangle dies in the set that there's two sizes of rectangles and then two sizes of frames. So you can like kind of mix and match and do whatever works for you. I just went with one of the rectangles. I didn't use the frame and I didn't use the die for the sentiment. I just wanted that rectangle. I really like, for this specific card, just how that looked. So I'd removed, after I had melted the embossing powder, I removed the excess anti-static powder with my microfiber cloth, die cut the sentiment. The panel and all the splatter and everything is dry, so I stuck that on my die cut plate, and I am going to die cut this with one of Simon's basic rectangle wafer dies, because the panel originally was like 6 by 4.5, something like that, like larger than an A2 card front. And this wafer die that I chose was the second largest from the set, so this is now smaller than an A2 card front, so the card base is going to frame it up a little bit. Speaking of the card base, top folding A2 white note card. Stuck that in my MISTI. I stuck a piece of Post-it tape where the score line is so I don't stamp past the score line. And then I stuck the pumpkin background into my MISTI again, and I'm stamping that with bundled sage, just distress ink. I've talked about this before. I'm trying to avoid using Oxide inks on the insides of my cards unless it's just kind of smaller areas, because Oxides have pigments in them and the pigments sit on top of the cardstock. And I find sometimes that when I'm going to write on the inside of my cards, the pen will catch on the Oxides, like on the pigments, and it's just annoying. So if it's something like distress that I'm using, I'll just use the regular distress ink versus the Oxide ink. But again, it's kind of splitting hairs, and a lot of times it doesn't matter, especially if you're using a good pen. But yeah, if I've got the, you know, if I'm using distress, I'll just grab the distress ink and stamp it on the inside. So that's what I did. And then I stamped another sentiment, one of the punny ones, because you guys know me, I love good pun, that says gourd vibes only. So I stamped that with the VerseFine Clear Nocturne ink. And then the background and the sentiment I popped up with Simon's Big Mama foam tape. So it'll give it a bit of dimension, but not a lot of bulk. And then finished it off with some gold confetti. So tucked those on, you know, around the sentiment and adhered them into place with little dabs of craft tacky glue. And then once these were adhered, this card is complete. So like I mentioned in the intro, I'll have a link to my Halloween playlist. That will be in the end screen at the end of the video. And then if you're interested in the challenge or the supplies I used, etc., just expand the description box below the video and everything will be there for you to check out if you're interested. And as always, thank you all so very much for hanging out with me, for thumbs upping and commenting. It helps a ton and I very much appreciate it. Subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you. And I will be seeing you all very soon in the next video. Bye. Thank you so much to my amazing Patreon supporters. For anyone that might be interested in supporting me over on Patreon, the link to that is in the description box below the video. For everyone else, as always, thank you all so much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you. And here's a couple other videos for you to check out in case you missed them. Bye.